Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Lincoln Live Lounge. Apologies we're late. As with the modern world at the moment, Liam had some issues with his device, but we're here with you now, so all is good with the world. I am absolutely thrilled to be hosting Crime and Punishment, a history of criminology, and I am even more delighted to welcome Professor Liam McCann, who's going to talk with us today. Liam, how are you doing? All right?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Strange times, but we're chins up, staying safe and well.
Fantastic. Liam's going to be talking about a plethora of all things criminology today, and we're going to be tying it up with talking about career pathways and real practical advice. And there's loads of opportunities for you to get involved with the live lounge itself as well, to be interactive. We want to be as fully interactive as we possibly can. And there is no better person to talk about that than our lovely producer, Darren Hill. Darren, come and join us.
Hi. So, I mean, I must say, as someone who's looking after the tech side of this live stream, I do apologize that the tech didn't work for a few minutes then. So I take some responsibility for that. But hopefully we're all up and running and we're going to be fine now. But yeah, as Tim said, please get involved. Submit your questions on whatever platform you're watching on. So whether you're watching on the website, click through to the YouTube stream and add in your comments, any thoughts or any questions there. And same with Facebook or what are the other platforms that we're streaming on? All the platforms. Just all the platforms. But yeah, mainly YouTube and Facebook. Go to the comment sections and submit your questions there, and we'll get to them today. If you have any questions that aren't about criminology, just about maybe studying in Lincoln in general, then please do either direct messages, or even better, head over to our virtual open day that will be this Saturday, where we've also got an exclusive live talk from Caroline Duffy as well, which should be brilliant. But we'll share more links and information about that later in the stream today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Darren. I'll say goodbye for now and let you deal with all the technical issues that we might have. Thank you very much. Fantastic. I think with everything that was going on, I actually forgot to introduce myself. My name's Tim. I am the Public Relations Manager here at the University of Lincoln, and I'm really excited for today. Liam, absolutely can't wait to get started with this. I've always found that the best place to start is at the very beginning. So I just wondered whether you could just give us an idea of the beginnings of criminology, how it was founded, etc., and we can go from there.
Okay, yeah, certainly. Criminology basically emerged at the time of the Enlightenment. Basically, scholars such as Cici Elikci tried to explain why we needed law, why we needed the rule of law. And this has shaped criminal law right throughout the world. Amazing insights. He was called Cici Elikci because it's going to be followed up by Cesare Lombroso, two Italians with major influences in our subject area. Classicists basically start with the presumption that we men come together and agree that I won't rob you if you don't rob me. We must surrender some of our rights, some of our liberties in exchange for the protection of the rule of law. Now, one of the little problems with classicism that this natural social contract emerges between men, but obviously excludes women at the time. You've got to think of 17th century Europe, women as rational actors. What? Choosing rationally? You couldn't comprehend that women at this period would be treated as rational actors. So classicism in its origins totally ignored women in this social contract. The next major school in criminology is positivism. And the first positivist is Cesare Lombroso. And Lombroso tries to adopt the idea of science. I explained to students the basic first science lesson that we tended to have in secondary school was the Bunsen burner, the water, applying heat to the water boils, it evaporates, etc. And this is the scientific method. There must be a cause for crime. And I explained to students, but imagine water had that brain. Imagine water was to decide, I don't fancy boiling today. I don't fancy evaporating today. I'm going to the pub instead. Now, this would make scientific method very difficult to apply. Lombroso's first experiments were by going into prisons and looking at criminals involved. Think of the epoch. He's in 1800s Italy, 19th century Italy, and he goes into women's prisons. And you know what he finds? And he's totally amazed that women they're in are hairier than normal women. And I think this is 18th century, 1800s Europe, the 19th century Europe. There's no big razor. You know, women won't have cutthroat razors because that's a weapon. So he finds these scientists, you know, you'd think you'd understand basic biology in terms of this here. It's no wonder that Foucault later said, when you look at the criminology, it sometimes makes you gasp. The founding fathers, we had a lot to recover from with those ideas.
Fantastic. I think that's absolutely, utterly fascinating. What I want to just at this stage is just, guys, please do put your comments in, put your questions in. I'll endeavour to get Liam to answer as many of them as I possibly can. So please don't forget to do that, anything at all.
If I can.
If you can, I'm sure you can, Liam, blimey. I think probably a good way to go, I'm really interested to find out how criminology then developed. Was there anything, any sort of historical events that perhaps speeded up or accelerated the study of criminology at all?
Well, if you look at the first school, classicism has a clear relationship to the rule of law. Classicists say that laws need to be clear, they need to be consistent, that punishments need to be unambiguously certain, that if you commit a crime, you should know what the punishment would be. There's no forgiveness for them. We have a duty to punish offenders. And this has a major influence, as I said, in criminal law throughout the world. You know, colloquial expressions that all of us use are actually based upon classicist principles. The punishment must fit the crime. Geraghty argued it had to be proportionate to the crime. You know, if people didn't realize the cost-benefit analysis, Cici Geraghty points out, the cost and the benefit of committing crime. The cost must simply outweigh the benefit. It mustn't be disproportionate, it mustn't be huge. Positivism comes along and it says, we're no longer interested in crime, we're more interested in the criminal. So this has a major impact in how prisons developed, in how policing develops, in how a court developed, neoclassicist influences in taking in court reports and looking at issues of those causes. So those issues of unemployment, poverty, that classicists said were not important, suddenly become important. Those issues are the things like your biological makeup. Lombroso was very clear that criminals had specific shaped heads and features of their body, tattoos, all these things. Imagine nowadays, you know, the tattoos were a symptom of criminality. You know, most football teams would be locked up.
I do find that really interesting, that sort of perception of criminality, and that. I just wonder if you could expand on that in regards to how that has developed. When you mentioned tattoos, and you mentioned how people perceive, you know, certain people having certain traits or certain personality traits because of, you know, how they look, how they dress, etc.
I joke the historical image of the hoodie. I remember teaching a lovely student in Liverpool many, many years ago. And he used to talk about, you know, one day this young lad's just, you know, Bob, he's just Christopher, etc., etc. And the next day he shaves all his head off, the classic skinhead haircut, and he's suddenly hard as nails. The student was taking this as the example of, but you look at things like the hoodie, the skirts around, you know, particular forms of dress, and there's a real consistent ability to look down on youth, particularly youth cultures. The Rolling Stones, you know, at one day, the classic brilliant song, you know, blame it on the Rolling Stones for everything that's wrong in America. Yeah. And the Rolling Stones later have an album which is called Respected, a song, and now we're respectable, playing on the White House lawn. You know, how come these deviant people that were undermining social order suddenly become normalized and accepted? There's lots of kind of youth groups that have that tradition. The mods and rockers, we have a kind of festival where old mods now come along to Lincoln and visit. and most of them are in their 60s and 70s now. But there's not that panic that the mods are coming to Lincoln.
Some of them are in their 30s. Thank you very much, Liam. We've had our first question. Ashley, do you think the rehabilitative ideal of the early 20th century will ever make a reappearance in criminal justice policy and practice?
Yeah, the rehabilitative aspiration. This is positivism, psychological positivism, sociological positivism, aspects of, giving educational classes. I remember Jeffrey Archer returning from Lincoln Prison, coming out of Lincoln Prison and saying, I was just so amazed how many people were illiterate. So if you give them skills, one of our alumni set up with one of the Lincolnshire firms a program to give basic building skills to train offenders in Lincoln prisons with these skills that would be employable. Around psychological aversion therapies, victim empathy, drugs awareness, all those rehabilitative programs have been put in place. But absolutely right. The question, Ashley, is very perceptive that by very much large and means, those programs have now been sidelined as almost a nothing works agenda. There's no point in doing that. One famous criminologist, our university, give her an honorary award a good number of years ago, Professor Pat Carlin, widely published in the area of criminology, but cuttingly, very scathingly said, given there's so many of these programs in the criminal justice process in our prisons in terms of this, she just said, it really is a wonder that our prisons aren't empty. Because if all these programs were working, then they would have empty prisons. In America, they're not called prisons, they're called correctional institutions. You'd be called a correctional officer in America. Today's big word is recidivism. And that's the rate at which, upon release from prison, you return to prison. America has an appalling rate of recidivism in terms of that. America is basically what we now call, and I think Ashley's question relates to this here, prisons essentially now being used as warehouses where you store purportedly dangerous, some of which are, but the vast majority are not, purportedly dangerous people to serve their time, and then you come back into the community. Unfortunately, much more likely to reoffend further up scale, all these things. So Ashley's point is very perceptive about the current political climate. Very little investment for that. Actually, the Conservatives have introduced the idea that you would reward people who will put programs on in prisons, will take control of prisons, provided people don't reoffend. One of our ex-alumni, who's a governor of a prison, jokingly said to me in conversation, you don't see many companies rushing to take on with this criteria that, can you guarantee, 90% will not reoffend within 2 years? If there was money to be made, people would be making money in that. But this is smart targets. Unless you meet these targets, then you wouldn't receive your payment. And he said, the private sector is in rushing to take up this opportunity to earn money.
I just think on that, on kind of relevant examples of these things, of them in practice, I just wonder whether you could sort of extend on examples of different theories and examples of them in practice.
Yeah, there is a fantastic book which is called The Sage Dictionary of Criminology. And basically in this dictionary, it's much more than a dictionary because there's about 2,000 words written on every example. But the review of it many years ago, the first review, one of the professors in criminology was saying there was parts of criminology here that he had never even heard of in terms of this here. So we now have green criminology, corporate crime criminology, Marxist criminology, socialist criminology, new left realist criminology, conservative criminology. There seems to be a criminology almost to fit every area. I want a biological determinist criminologist. I read an American article quite recently criticizing criminology, the sociology-based, social sciences-based, as opposed to the biological-based criminology. And one of the arguments is, criminology can't possibly be a serious subject because it has too many theories. And I think there's a wee cutting edge there in terms of things, but there is the opportunity, cultural criminology, to look at youth cultures, specific cultures. There are so many shapes and forms that you can literally lose count.
Completely. We just had a really lovely comment from Jodie, I think, alumna here, who says, "Hello, Liam. You taught me between 2002 and 2005 as a sociology teacher. I definitely used the criminology knowledge. Thank you and all of the lecturers for that." I just think that's quite a nice thing to read out, right? Isn't that lovely?
It is so lovely when you get those comments. I remember about 2 years ago getting a student who commented and just contacted me out of the blue to say, "There's not a day that goes by that I don't use something I learned on my criminology studies." He was working as a probation officer in Cheshire, but those types of feedback many years after the alumni have left our establishment to be appreciated for the kind of life chances, because that's my, I'm going on a tangent, but that's my reason that I'm in education. Education for me is about empowerment. Education for me is about equipping students with the skills and capabilities and life abilities that they will be able to go out and seek those careers. I don't believe we genuinely live in any meritocracy. If you're awfully rich and daddy owns a biscuit factory, you're made. It doesn't matter, how hard you work or not how hard you work. For the rest of us, we have to work hard in society, and higher education definitely facilitates students. That past student, give the example, as now a sociology teacher, as these are the careers and opportunities that can transform students' lives. And that's what I'm in, empowering students to get their fair chance of what's going out there.
Absolutely. Fantastic to hear. We've had another comment as well from Simon, who's asked, "Is criminology a growing field?" And that would have been my next question, really. What is the future of criminology, basically?
Yeah. I remember. Thank you, Simon. That's obviously a very pertinent question for a lecturer on criminology. I remember many years ago, one of our line managers, I won't name, was actually saying, what's going to happen when the criminology bubble bursts in terms of this here. And up until very recently, the record number of students we ever had in the first year was 252 in terms of 252 students coming on to our first year. The year before last, we had 297 students joining the first year. So and this is nationally, this is a national trend that students both, for me, education is very important. It's going to sound really strange. Ironically, for most people, it is not what they have specifically studied, but the skills that they learn in studying that. My favorite example of weird degrees that do exist is medieval water transport. There must be jobs out there. There's a high demand for that skills and knowledge in terms of that. But this is it's those interpersonal skills, it's those research skills, it's those communication skills that make employability. And if you come and study something that you're interested in, that gets your brain ticking over. My brother-in-law is the deputy director of the American Food Association, and he had to speak to Parliament, and he was talking about how good forensic science was in getting students involved in sciences, the vast majority who would not use that in a forensic science occupation, but would have those science skills that would be used in the food industry, that would be used in secondary and higher education, etc., etc. So the perception that you study criminology and you become a policeman is not what criminology is about. We offer a wide range of skills, and the variety of careers that our student alumni go on to take up are just fascinating.
I think it's kind of just an ongoing effect, isn't it? I mean, I studied sociology at university, and it was that kind of got me interested in many a different thing, and so ultimately that did shape my career path, simply because you know, I didn't become a sociology lecturer, a sociology teacher, but it absolutely sent me in the direction that I eventually wanted to go in. I think that's really interesting. Just on that, in regards to there was a question I did know from George. There we go. Just in terms of advancements and where we are today, he wants to know about in what ways do advancements in technology affect criminology?
Okay, this is a fascinating one. I was literally reading a new book, 2020, in terms of this plans. And this was the idea. I don't know if you're aware, when we use data analysis, lots of controversy around elections, whereby social media is adapted, whereby we look at employment patterns, educational history, etc. And all this data analysis would be able to predict who we are going to vote. Likewise, this is being utilized in what they're calling predictive policing. This academic that wrote this book was saying, you know, in the future with predictive policing, we will be able to predict the offender, the venue, and the time, even before the crime has committed. And I just went, nah. yeah, that's what you think, you know, because when our security services have, you know, dangerous terrorists on their watch list, 7/7, Manchester Arena, these people were on the security services, were on the intelligence services watch list, but somehow they weren't able to predict what they would do. So the predictive potential is for some people is a lovely aspiration, but the reality of that predictive potential isn't clearly there at this time.
Talking about this time,
yes,
and the current circumstances in which we find ourselves in, and let's not beat around the bush, these are quite exceptional circumstances. And actually, Cici on here asked a question: how do you think COVID will impact offenders? I think my question would be more broad than that. It would be, you know, how are the circumstances we find ourselves in, how is that affecting criminology generally?
Cici, that's a brilliant question, because the risk to offenders in our prison system, to prison officers in our prison system, to the whole personnel within our prison system is obviously very clear and unambiguous. You will have seen certain cases, delays in people proceeding to trial. All this thing has meant that our allegedly smooth working criminal justice system has actually slowed down in many areas. But even just the change in policing, the change in criminality, you know, could you ever have predicted that, you know, if I have 7 people around, it becomes a criminal offense? Unless, of course, they're in a protective bubble and we're the grandparents looking for the grandkids. These are the types of issues. I joked in our local post office in terms of, you know, you used to be terrified when people came into the store with a mask on. You're now terrified when they don't come in without a mask on. These are the very real types of decisions we're having. And lots of us are engaged in that aspect of the social contract. What can we do to support each other? What will we surrender? What rights, what freedoms will we give up in hopefully gaining the protection from this virus, the protection that is necessary for us all if we're going to reach the end of this pandemic? So it's become a risk society. That it's an area of criminology that actually you try and diminish risks. Can you ever really predict that there would be a time period where actually, you know, New Labour broke in antisocial behaviour orders? You know, this government has kind of brought in social behaviour orders. You're not allowed to be social. You're not allowed to go and meet people. You're not allowed to talk. So it's as you implied, it is just amazingly strange times.
Could I ask sorry, Liam, just the speed in which these laws come into fruition and restrictions and then into law. How How does that have an effect on people generally? But I'm fascinated in regards to the study of criminology as well. I mean, never before, certainly in my lifetime, have I ever seen laws passed through Parliament as quickly as they are doing now, and for good reason, obviously.
The history of emergency legislation in the UK is actually really fascinating. It used to be that the Initial Prevention of Terrorism Act 1974 brackets temporary provisions. That's when 1974. It's only temporary. Did they get that right? But that was a record because it passed through Parliament, all the stages, all the houses of Parliament in 24 hours. Now, if we look at the government has basically adopted what would perhaps be considered draconian powers because of the emergency. Parliament has granted this here, but you're now seeing some politicians, some conservative members of the Conservative Party, saying that this is excessively restrictive, this is excessively draconian, and actually things like the second lockdown, many were opposing. Now you have that. It's a political area where we're going into, but it's a law and order area that just happens to stray into the politics of this here. So it is a heated and controversial area. Whether or not we feel safe in this government, in this current climate, whether or not we feel safe on issues like going into Brexit with a no deal, this will promise to be a really safe thing. The impacts on crime that actually might mean, the impacts on public health that might actually mean, that you don't want to, sorry, I'm not the Kaiser Chiefs, I'm not predicting a riot, but there could really be social instability if lots of these things just seem to be happening at the same time. I was thinking literally today in preparation for this here, those religious people who would walk around and say the end of the world is nigh. I think that'd be kind of really scary if most people saw them, given the crisis that we're all facing in so very many ways. I don't mean to be pessimistic. I genuinely think we're going to get through this here. Our NHS has saved our lives. We'll clap for them. We've shown amazing social solidarity in the way in which communities have come together and supported, and just individuals like Marcus Rashford have been brilliant in ensuring that children are fed. This just the basic things that a good, decent society should do. It's really nice to see.
Absolutely, and I think the examples of that at the university as well, with the way that the community has come together, it's been really lovely to see.
I saw lots of universities were actually offering during the initial lockdown, were not actually offering refuge spaces to women in domestic violence situations. What universities have done in supporting communities in this particular period has been exemplary. Our university, with bids for masks and raising money for masks and producing our own mask in order of assisting the NHS, has been absolutely exemplary.
Yeah, fantastic. I just want to say to Courtney and Chloe that I'm not ignoring you. I'm going to come back to careers, but to be optimistic, I'm just going to read out Courtney's comment here. I'm currently a third-year criminology student. There are so many job opportunities I never even thought would be related to criminology. The subject is very broad. That's we can come back to that, but I just want to raise that as a something to be optimistic about, really. There's a very specific question from Josephine that I think merits an answer. Are criminal justice approaches the best way to respond to crime? Does punishment really work in that way, in the way that society think it does?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question by Josephine. One of our students in terms of that there, but it is that exemplar in terms of, locking people up. Is that really the best way? I give the example of Salford under New Labour was spending more on giving out ASBOs than it was on youth services. Now, youth services aren't a panacea. They won't necessarily stop youth delinquency and criminality in that way, but evidence is that there has a good chance of diverting young people, of keeping young people away from schools. New Labour's exemplar of policy, schools, When I went to school, you could go and register, and those truants would disappear after the early morning register. You can't get out of schools now once you're into them. They have multiple register features, etc., etc. They have educational maintenance allowance was one of the things that they'd encourage poorer children of 16 and 17 to stay on to school, to get better qualifications, to get careers, to get jobs, etc. All those social policies are lovely, lovely examples of actually crime control. You know, educational maintenance was never thought to be a crime control agenda, but it was. It was keeping young people in education. If you can get them before the age of 20, it's actually 23, but if you can get young people out of contact with the criminal justice system up until the age of 23, they're much more likely to live an honest, straight and narrow life thereafter. And they settle down, they meet, you know, the girlfriend, boyfriend. He says, well, you're not going to do that. I want you staying at home. We're looking after, we're saving up for, you know, all those things that develop social cohesion. New Labour actually had in an educational policy. I don't like New Labour, don't get me any way confused, but it's that type of policy that looks like an education policy, but clearly had crime control agendas within it.
Okay. I think now would be a good time, as we've passed the half-hour mark, to actually come back to career pathways, and we can, again, this is quite broad in of itself. I'm sure we can go off on many a tangent, Liam, in regards to this question. But I just thought whether we can sort of give people an idea of the career pathways that someone might have after getting a criminology degree.
One of my favorite example is our alumni coming back from the very first alumni on Lincoln campus. They had graduated 10 years earlier, and they came back on campus for a reunion weekend. I'd come onto campus to show them around campus, and it had grown so immensely and it had changed so much, and just meeting them to hear what they were doing. And you know, one was a researcher working for ones of the Inns of Courts in London. One of them was working on the Olympic bid. This shows how long ago, an East End lad in terms of things, but because he had a degree, he had managed to get a job working on the Olympic bid. One of the young women was coordinating the youth offending team in Nottingham, and she said, oh, I'm getting a little bit bored with this here. I thought about going back into education. And at that point, I was a senior lecturer, and I was earning, I think, about £30,000. And she said, what would I earn? And I said, oh, well, you'd probably be coming in at a senior lecture scale. You'd probably be on something like my salary. I can't remember exactly, but something like £32,000. And she went, oh my God. And I thought, that's amazing. How much was that? And she just went, I couldn't take a salary cut like that. And this was a young woman who had taught 10 years as the example. My favorite example of alumni is a young lad, I can't use his name, is James. And James graduated, and James I wrote him the reference, and he got a job, trainee manager at WH Smith's. Whoa, that's exciting. Nobody's
involved in jobs like that.
Yeah. But a year after graduating, I got a phone call from MI5 because James was having a career move from WH Smith's to MI5. Everything in between is my example of James. If you think about the breadth of that we cover, it's quite interesting because the guy from MI5 wanted to come onto campus, wanted to interview me about James, and came onto campus and my office, and he said, what type of family do you think James comes from? And I said, I don't know. I would presume a respectable middle-class family. And he said, does James have any drugs or alcohol problems? And I said, again, I don't know, but you know, he attends well, he's lucid, coherent, so I'd be very surprised if he did. And he said, you may find the next question a little bit difficult to answer. And me sort of took a step back, but I clocked in my head, I know the history of MI5, I know the intelligence spies and the leakage and the whole history of that. So I gathered an idea. And he said, do you know, does James have any unusual sexual practices or preferences? I just know, how well do you think I know my students? No, I don't. No, I haven't got a clue. You know, I don't want to. But the MI5 guy was very clear that they weren't discriminatory against homosexuals or lesbians in MI5. It was just if they weren't out of the closet, that meant that they were liable to be bribed or threatened with exposure. So you could join MFI, but if you were gay or lesbian, you had to be out. You couldn't be in the closet because of the risk that would pose to you.
Wow, I remember doing quite a few in a couple of the jobs I've had previously. I've had the reference process of it was civil service ultimately, but yeah, it was quite invasive in regards to everything that I had to submit, and you come away from it thinking, have I done something wrong? And you're tracking through your own past in regards to what you.
Yes.
I'm going to ask Darren to put Ashley's come back. Hello, Ashley again. His comment on the screen for you, which is that one there. Only because I'm not overly sure how to pronounce the last word, and so I'm going to ask you to read that for me, please, Lee.
It is recidivism. That's the big word. It basically means.
I was too scared I'd get it wrong.
Yeah, no, don't worry. It basically means the rate upon release that offenders return back to prison. So it's the recall rate, the thing. Do the 19th century terms such as criminal class have any value today? Yeah, the 19th century was about identifying who are the criminal class. Is there a specific criminal class in terms of this here? Right-wing alleged criminologists and social theorists, what they write is so weak and not really, I would call it a theory. But people like Charles Murray talk about the underclass. This is a theme that conservative politicians often exploit. This ideas of, people in working class communities who've never had a job, whose, histories of offending, whose, histories of drug addiction, history of alcohol addiction, histories of, single parents, etc., etc. We had a brilliant researcher from the University of York who actually had said they'd gone into two really huge working class communities and had offered £1,000 for anybody who could find anyone who had any family that hadn't had a job in 3 generations. And you can imagine what £1,000 meant. Yeah. And they had all these kind of people who were put forward, but not one of them had not had a job for 3 generations. So the classic bit is around here, the rough, respectable working class. Charles Murray's implying it's not just being working class, that within these communities, there are those people who have never worked, who have never aspired. I talk about this in relation to unemployment. There seems to be an awful lot more people who don't want to work, who are lazy and allegedly feckless when the economy's in recession, as it's just about to be massive increases in employment, than there are when the economy's booming because people have found jobs. Now, if they were naturally idle, the word feckless has been idle and feckless, then they would be a consistent figure, but they're not. All of us at times have struggled in our lives to find jobs, to find opportunities. Some of us have been fortunate. I'm now in my 29th year at this university in one shape or form. So, I like the job.
Yeah, well, the university is very lucky to have you. I think it's nearly time to wrap up. I just want to finish by recognising Chloe Hunter's question about what kind of doors does criminology open. I think you've probably answered that already, in that there's loads of them, and they are vast and sweeping and broad.
Yeah, I try and encourage students to get the best degree classification that they can. Obviously, a pass award opens some doors. Obviously, a 3rd class honours opens some doors. A 2nd class honours opens some more doors, and an upper 2nd class honours opens an awful lot more doors, and a 1st class honours opens even more doors. It is about what that degree says about you. Often students struggle with a year, struggle with a module, might fail, might have to resit. And I say to those students, just talk to your employer about how you went back and applied yourself more, how you learned from that failure, how you recovered, how you worked during your degree, all these things that enhance your employability. That's what doors I'm trying to. The university has great services. Our career service are wonderful in advising students. Some of their advice around CVs, around job applications, around even just tidying up your Facebook accounts and your social media accounts. All those types of things are just so clear, so enabled to enhance students' employability and lifelong chances.
Fantastic. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think on that note, I'm going to say a big thank you to Professor Liam McCann. Thanks, Liam. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. I really, really enjoyed that. And I really want to say thank you to everybody that joined in as well. I could go on forever. We should do this again. Let's do this again, Liam.
You wouldn't have believed how nervous I was preparing for this.
No problems at all. Absolutely fantastic. I want to bring back Darren at this point, who's going to come back and speak about how our very exclusive and special guest, Caroline Duffy, the Virtual Open Day on Saturday.
Exactly. Well, firstly, that was an absolutely brilliant talk. Liam, you must have the luckiest students, because I could actually sit and listen to you talk about criminology for hours. I thought that was brilliant. It's so fascinating, like the things that you wouldn't have known, really. I've certainly learned so much from the past 40 minutes anyway, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren.
No problem. And if any of our viewers are wanting to learn more about the social sciences or political sciences here at the University of Lincoln, there is the Social and Political Sciences evening happening tonight. I'll post a link in the comments now. So if you head to the comments, you can find the link there. And that'll be running from 6 until 7 this evening. So it'll be a great opportunity to discover more about some of the things that Liam's talked about today, and all the other courses as well that relate to those areas. We do have the virtual open day as well this Saturday as well. That's 10 until 2 with, as Tim mentioned, the exclusive live talk from Caroline Duffy, which should be brilliant. She's a poet and visiting artist here at the University of Lincoln. So it's good to have her back again. And also next week, she will be back for our next live lounge as well. So return here same time, 4:30, and Caroline Duffy will be here to do some poetry reading. So it should be brilliant.
Fantastic. I think just a couple of comments coming in now saying what a fantastic talk that was. So thank you, Sue, and thank you, Alex. We really appreciate everybody joining in. I think on that note, we'll say goodbye. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.